And welcome back. In the previous section, I talked about what needs to be done, which is your work breakdown structure. And then I also talked about who needs to do it, which is your responsibility matrix. In this section, we're going to talk through when it needs to be done. And this is the process of sequencing the activities. And the sequencing of the activities expressed in what we call a network diagram. A network diagram is simply a spider web of all of the activities in relationship to one another. So I repeat that. A network diagram is simply a list of all the activities in the spider web in relation to one another. So some activities can be done concurrently, which means that they can be done at the same time. Other activities need to be done sequentially, and that is the relationship. So for example, if you build a house, you cannot put the roof on the house until such time that you've built the walls. You cannot build the walls until such time that you've done the foundation. The walls are dependent on the foundation, and the ceiling is dependent on the walls. Those three activities is what we call sequential activities. However, once you've got the roof up, you can now start doing the plumbing as well as the electrical work because the roof is up, and you can start putting the windows and the doors in. You can do all three of those at the same time, and what those are, what we call concurrent activities. So your network diagram is an expression of the sequence of activities and how they relate to one another. What I want to do now is point you to the little QR code. If you want to pause, you can pause here, squeeze, and go and have a look. I think it's about 6 minutes and 21 seconds is the length of this little video clip. And you can go and listen to the difference between a PERT and a CPM method. So PERT and CPM and PDM are just different methods and different methodologies that are employed in order to sequence activities within project management. PERT, which is Program Evaluation Review Technique, Critical Path Method, and Precedence Diagramming Method. I'm not going to go into explanation of these, but what I want to do is just pause on CPM because CPM is the method that we're using and that the textbook uses to illustrate network diagrams and the process of sequencing activities, meaning the process of understanding what needs to be done by when. So CPM works on the assumption or works on the principle that there is a list of activities within the network, meaning if you look at all of these activities as part of this big spider web that I told you about earlier, if you look at all of these activities as a spider web, so critical path method works on the principle that in the spider web, there's a chain of activities that are critical to the execution of the project. Let me repeat that. Critical path method works on this principle that within the network, there is a list of activities or chain of activities that is absolutely critical to the overall success of the project. And generally, always, that list of activities is the longest path through your network, meaning that if you string all of those activities one next to the other and you add up all of the time, meaning activity 1 takes 5 days, activity 2 takes 3 days, if you add all of that time together, that will be the longest period through the entire network. Why the longest period? Why not the shortest one? So it is quite counterintuitive. But the principle is that if those activities take the longest to complete, that is how long the project will take. The project won't go any quicker if you don't complete those list or those chain of activities. Therefore, those chain of activities are critical, which means that even if one of those activities in that chain runs late, it means that your entire project will be in jeopardy of running late or not being able to be completed on time. So some of the network principles that we use, you'll see that the textbook uses a very specific format, and the textbook uses little blocks. In some of the videos, you'll see that people uses slightly different forms, but the textbook uses a little block. And in that block, this is the work package. There is a specific verb describing that particular activity. There is also a time, and there is also a person attached to it as well at times. Most importantly, network principles or network diagrams work with relationships. So some relationships are what we call serial relationships. Those are relationships in which you can only wash the car, you can only dry the car after you've washed the car, and you'll see that that relationship is indicated by the means of an arrow, which means that washing the car comes first and then drying the car comes second. You also have what we call concurrent relationships, in which there are certain activities that can be done at the same time. The one thing you cannot have in critical path method is you cannot have circular relationships, or what we call illogical relationships. These are perpetually repeats itself. These are loops. And why is a loop impossible in a project? Because the very definition of a project is that it has a start and it has an end date. There are different types of network diagrams, and in your textbook you'll be able to see some of them. There is what we call activities that are done serially. You can see activities that are done concurrently, and then there's also laddering as well. And each one of them are used within the network diagramming process. Creating a network diagram, they need to be a logical sequence of activities. They need to flow. They need to make sense. When you read through them, they need to make sense. Dig the hole, pour in the concrete, lay the foundation, build the wall, put the ceiling on. They should show dependent relationships. They should show which activities are dependent on one another. And you can also use subnetworks for similar activity sequences and relationships. Your project diagram should answer the following questions, which is: when do certain things start and when do certain things end? They must show that time relationship and what happens next. Each activity should define a work package. They should have a person responsible as well as a duration attached to it. In the textbook, there's an example of a database system development, which you can have a look at. And on page 129, please have a look at the Ukudala Office Designs project, in which it goes through the process of developing a work breakdown structure, assigning a responsibility matrix, developing a network diagram in which you can see how it works in the real world, or how a real world example looks like. And finally, in this section, I want to touch briefly on project management information systems. So project information systems, or project management software, are quite an important element of the toolkit of a project manager, especially in modern times where projects are very, very complicated and very complex with many, many different moving parts. However, the project management software does not replace the project manager, because a project consists of people, and your weakest link is the people within that project. They must still execute the project. And what a project manager brings is that ability to get the best out of people, to encourage people, to motivate people, and to hold people accountable. What the project management software does help with, it helps with generating reports, diagrams, charts, and it ultimately gives the project manager ability to plan and control the projects right down to the minutiae of it. For further information, you can go and read through Appendix A on page 467. So that sort of closes off theme 2, which dealt with scheduling of a project from developing the work breakdown structure right through to sequencing the activities. The next section will deal with project closing and the different criteria and the different actions that needs to happen at the final stage of the project life cycle.